Hey everyone, we're about to dive into a topic that's pretty much always in the headlines, but honestly, it's often really misunderstood: gun violence. Our goal here is to cut through all the noise and just look at what the data tells us about how big this issue really is, what's behind it, and how it looks around the world. So let's get right into it. To really wrap our heads around the scale of this, just look at this number: 1,000. According to the United Nations, that's how many people could be dying from gun-related violence every single day across the globe. That's not a yearly number, it's a daily one. I mean, that's just a staggering figure, and it really sets the stage for why we need to understand this better. Okay, so to make sense of all this, here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start with the big picture, then explore the different types of violence. After that, we'll unpack the causes and the staggering costs, do a deep dive on the assumptions around mental illness, and finally, we'll zoom out for a global snapshot. All right, let's jump into our first section, the big picture. Before we can get anywhere with this topic, we've all got to be on the same page about what we're actually talking about. So let's start with a clear definition. When we say gun-related violence, it's not just about crime. It's any act of violence with a firearm that causes a gunshot wound. And here's the thing to remember. This includes homicides, sure, but it also includes accidental deaths and suicides. And as you're about to see, that last one is a huge piece of the puzzle. Now, take a look at this. When you compare the United States to other similar high-income countries, the gun homicide rate isn't just a bit higher. It's more than 25 times the average. That one statistic right there is absolutely essential for understanding just how unique the situation is in the U.S. Okay, so that gives us a sense of the scale. Now for Section 2, a spectrum of violence. It's really easy to think of gun violence as just one single thing, but the data shows it comes in a lot of different forms, and honestly, some of them might not be what you'd expect.
And this chart right here, this is one that really makes you pause. When we hear about gun deaths in the US, the focus is almost always on homicides, right? But look at the data. The biggest slice of this pie, by far, is suicide. At 64%, firearms-related suicides happen almost twice as often as homicides. It's a huge part of the conversation that so often gets overlooked.
So you see how this branches out. We just saw the suicide numbers, and a big reason they're so high is because firearms are just the most lethal method of an attempt. Then you have intentional homicide, where guns are used in 2/3 of all cases in the US. Their mere presence is also a major risk factor in domestic violence situations. And of course, they're used in robberies and assaults. And finally, you have that smaller but still significant category of accidental deaths. This all leads us to a really important question. Section 3, causes and costs. What's actually driving all this, and what's the real aftermath it leaves in its wake? Well, when you look at the causes, the data kind of points in two main directions. On one hand, you have psychological factors, right? Things like depression or substance abuse, they can play a role for sure. But the research suggests they aren't the primary driver of overall violence rates. Then you have the external factors. And this is really key. The source material shows that up to 85% of shootings are not random acts by strangers. They are heat-of-the-moment conflicts between people who know each other: family, friends, acquaintances. And now let's talk about the money. Because the financial impact is just, wow. It starts here: $2.8 billion. In the US alone, that's the estimated cost every year just for the hospital stays related to firearm injuries. Just the hospitalizations. Now let's zoom in on what that means for a single person. The average hospital bill for just one gunshot patient, it's over $95,000. Think about that. That's a debt that can totally upend someone's life, and it puts an incredible strain on our whole healthcare system. But those hospital bills, they're really just the tip of the iceberg. When you start adding in everything else, the cost of emergency services, the justice system, prisons, even lost wages from victims, the total estimated cost in the US explodes to $229 billion a year. That's billion with a B, a truly mind-boggling number. So that high-level look at causes brings us right to our fourth section, a deep dive into a narrative you hear all the time: the link between mental illness and gun violence. We're going to try and put the headlines aside for a minute and just see what the public health data actually shows us. So let's just ask the question straight up. Is mental illness the primary cause of gun violence? It's an idea that you hear over and over again in the public conversation, but do the numbers really back it up? Well, this quote from public health research gives a pretty direct answer.
They looked at a 10-year period and found that fewer than 5% of all gun-related killings were carried out by people with a diagnosed mental illness. Flip that around. That means that over 95% of these acts were committed by people without one. So, if a mental health diagnosis isn't a strong predictor, what is? Well, the research points to a whole set of other factors that have much stronger links. Things like alcohol and drug use, that can increase risk by up to 7 times. A history of childhood abuse, being male, and, like we saw earlier, those social conflicts combined with easy access to a firearm. Okay, for our final section, let's zoom all the way out and take a global snapshot. Because looking at how different countries approach this issue can tell us a lot about how different policies can lead to dramatically different outcomes.
Take Australia's story, for example. Back in 1996, the country was just horrified by the Port Arthur massacre. And in response, the government passed sweeping new gun laws and launched this huge gun buyback program. And what happened next? Well, as you can see, in the years that followed, gun-related deaths began a long, steady decline.
And this table really shows just how different those national journeys can be. You've got Australia with that significant decline after making big changes. Then in complete contrast, you have Sweden, which for a whole bunch of complex reasons has actually seen a steep increase in gun violence. And then there's the United States, which continues to be this major outlier with that 25 times higher rate we saw at the very beginning. And to really bring this all back to the human cost, here's one final and, frankly, very sobering piece of data from the US. As of 2020, firearms are now the #1 cause of death for American kids and teenagers. They've actually surpassed car accidents for the first time. So, after going through all this data, where does that really leave us? We've seen that the numbers often challenge our common assumptions. We've seen this complicated web of interpersonal conflict, staggering economic costs, and wildly different outcomes around the world. There really are no simple answers here. Which kind of leaves us with one final thought. Given everything we've just seen, what's the most important question we should be asking next?